Claude responded, "At my daughter's retirement party, 40 of her coworkers were raising paper cups of grocery store champagne in the break room she'd walked into as a scared twirl. At my daughter's retirement party, 40 of her coworkers were raising paper cups of grocery store champagne in the break room she'd walked into as a scared 22-year-old and was leaving 31 years later as regional manager." Then, in the middle of the toast, my daughter set down her cup, walked over, and put her hand on my arm. "Dad," she said quietly, "I need you to look at something tonight. Something's wrong with Mom's trust." 5 words that mattered, no explanation. My chest went tight because after 34 years running a small accounting firm in Danbury, Connecticut, I had learned that when someone says something's wrong in that particular flat, careful voice, they already know the answer and are hoping you'll tell them they're wrong. Before we go further, I want to say thank you for being here with me, friend. Wherever you're watching from, drop your city below. I read every one. Hit subscribe if you want more stories like this. And one honest note, this story blends real experience with fictionalized details for the sake of the lesson inside it. Any resemblance to real people is coincidental, but I promise you the truth in it is not. The party was held on the 2nd floor of Whitfield Insurance Group, the same beige building my daughter Renee had walked into in 1994, with a resume and a blazer 2 sizes too big, borrowed from her mother. Ruth would have loved this room tonight. String lights taped to drop ceiling tiles. A sheet cake with Renee's photo printed in frosting, slightly crooked. Ruth had been gone 3 years now, and I still sometimes turned to say something to her before I remembered the seat beside me was empty. Renee stood at the front of the room in a blue dress, thanked her team, made a joke about the coffee machine that had broken down twice a year for 3 decades, and got a real laugh, the kind that comes from people who actually like each other. She looked so much like her mother it still caught me sometimes, the way she tucked her hair back before she started talking, exactly like Ruth used to before a difficult conversation. Beside her stood her husband, Craig, holding 2 cups of champagne, one for himself and one for a colleague of Renee's named Priya, who I noticed watched Craig a beat longer than seemed necessary, though I told myself that was an old detective's habit. No, an old accountant's habit of reading rooms that didn't need reading. That's when Renee crossed to me at the back table. "Dad," she said, her voice low enough that only I could hear it under the noise, "I need you to look at something tonight. Something's wrong with Mom's trust." I kept my face steady, the way I'd learned to keep it steady across thousands of client meetings where someone was about to find out their business partner had been skimming, or their bookkeeper had been quietly borrowing, or their spouse had opened a second account nobody knew about. My stomach dropped anyway. "What exactly did you see?" "Huh," I asked. "A withdrawal," she said. 11,000, 2 weeks ago, from the account Mom set up for my kids' education. I only caught it because I was helping Aunt Carol with her taxes and pulled up the statement by accident. I looked past her, at Craig laughing with 2 coworkers by the cake table, his tie loosened, his cup refilled. He had married my daughter 9 years ago. He sold commercial insurance, made good money, coached Little League on Saturdays, and had never once, in 9 years, given me a single reason to distrust him. That was, I would learn later, exactly the point. "We'll talk about it tomorrow," I told Renee. "Tonight, let people celebrate you." She nodded, but her eyes stayed on mine a second too long, the way Ruth's used to when she wanted me to know she'd remember I'd promised. I stood at that party for another hour, shook hands, ate a piece of the crooked cake, and underneath all of it, my mind was already doing what 34 years of forensic bookkeeping had trained it to do, building a spreadsheet nobody could see, laying out columns, dates, names, waiting for the numbers to start talking. The drive home to Ridgefield took 22 minutes on empty roads, and I drove it at exactly the speed limit, the way I do when my hands need something simple to manage while my mind works on something complicated. The porch light was on. I'd started leaving it on 18 months after Ruth passed, unable to stand walking into a dark house, and I'd never stopped. I went straight to the small office off the kitchen, the room that used to be Ruth's sewing room, full of patterns and fabric swatches and half-finished projects she always swore she'd get back to. Now it held a desk, a filing cabinet, and one framed photograph. Ruth on the back deck the summer before her diagnosis, laughing at something, sun in her hair, looking like a woman who believed she had all the time in the world. I sat down, turned on the desk lamp, and pulled out the folder where I kept copies of the trust documents. Ruth and I had set up the education trust for our grandchildren 9 years ago, right around the time Renee married Craig, funded with the proceeds from selling my late father's hardware store. $41,000, meant to sit untouched until Ava and Marcus turned 18. I logged into the account portal with hands that were steadier than I felt. There it was, $11,000, withdrawn 16 days ago, transferred to an account I didn't recognize. Then, scrolling further back, another withdrawal I hadn't caught. $6,000, 4 months earlier, then $3,000, 7 months before that. $20,000. Gone in pieces small enough that a busy grandfather checking statements twice a year would miss them, and large enough to matter. My hands went flat on the desk, the way they do when I need a second before my next move. I looked at the photograph of Ruth and said, out loud, to the empty room, "Did you know something? Is that why you asked me to add your name as co-trustee last year, when you were already sick and tired and should have been resting?" I hadn't understood it then. I'd thought it was Ruth being thorough, the way she always was, tying up loose ends before the end came. Now I wondered if some part of her had sensed something and never had the chance to say it plainly. I opened the drawer where I kept Ruth's old laptop, the one I hadn't touched since the funeral because looking through it felt like intruding on a person who could no longer say yes or no. I powered it on, waited the long minute it took to boot, and typed in her password, which was our wedding date, because Ruth always said a password was only as good as the person guarding the door, and she trusted me with every door in her life. Her email loaded. I went to search, typed Craig, and found a folder she'd made 3 years ago, before her diagnosis, before any of this, labeled simply, Watch. Inside was a single email to her sister, my sister-in-law Denise, dated 4 months before Ruth got sick. D. Don't say anything to Bobby yet. He'll think I'm being a jealous mother-in-law. But Craig asked me an odd question at dinner last week. Wanted to know exactly how the kids' trust was structured, who the trustees were, when it distributes. Renee wasn't in the room. He asked while she was in the kitchen. Probably nothing. But you know I don't forget things like that. My hand tightened on the edge of the desk until the wood pressed into my palm. Ruth had seen it. 3 years ago, before the sickness took everything else, some quiet part of her had noticed and filed it away, and never gotten the chance to follow the thread. Because, 6 weeks after that email, the headaches started, and after that, there wasn't room in either of our lives for anything except getting through each day. I sat in that sewing room, in my dead wife's chair, and I put my face in my hands, and I cried the way men my age don't like to admit they still can, hard and sudden, and entirely without permission from myself. She had known. She had written it down and carried it quietly so she wouldn't worry her daughter, and she had run out of time before she could finish what she started. When it passed, I wiped my face, poured 2 fingers of the scotch I don't usually drink, and called the only person I trusted enough to help me do this right. Walt Higgins picked up on the 3rd ring, gravelly and half asleep, the way he always sounds after 9 at night. Walt and I had been friends since we were 26 years old, sharing a 2-desk office above a dry cleaner's, building our accounting practices side by side for 3 decades before he retired, and I kept going a few more years out of stubbornness. If anyone still had the instincts and the contacts to help me trace money quietly, it was Walt. "Bobby," he said, "it's late. Somebody die?" "Not yet," I said. "I need a favor. Off the books. I need you to help me trace an account." There was a pause, the sound of him sitting up in bed the way old friends do when they hear something in your voice they haven't heard in years. "Whose account?" "My son-in-law's," I said. Walt didn't ask why. He never did, not when it mattered. "Send me what you've got. I'll come by in the morning." Walt arrived at 7:15 the next day in the same Navy Buick he'd been driving for a decade, parking it at the same careful angle in my driveway he always used. A man of habits older than most marriages. He came in through the kitchen door without knocking, poured himself coffee like he lived there, and sat down across from me at the table where I'd already spread out 3 years of statements. "You didn't sleep," he said, looking at my face. "Not much," I admitted. "What did you find?" Walt slid a printed sheet across the table. "The account the money went to belongs to a company called Ferncrest Advisory Solutions. registered in Delaware. No website, no employees on record. One officer listed, a woman named Sandra Kellerman. I studied the name. It meant nothing to me. Who is she? That's the interesting part, Walt said, wrapping both hands around his mug. I ran her. 46 years old, former paralegal at an estate law firm in Stamford. Let go 4 years ago after some irregularities in how she handled a client trust distribution. Nothing ever charged. Just quietly shown the door. L. My stomach turned. Someone who understood trusts. Someone who understood exactly how money moved through a family and how to make withdrawals look routine. And Craig? I asked. Give me a minute, Walt said, and pulled out a second sheet. I asked around at the club, made a few calls I probably shouldn't have. Craig's insurance commissions have been down almost 40% over the last 2 years. He's been telling people it's a slow market, but he's also carrying 2 mortgages now. Bought a lake house last spring nobody in the family seems to know about. Renee doesn't know, I said slowly. That's my read, Walt said. And here's the piece that made me call you before you were even awake. Sandra Kellerman and Craig Holloway share a father, different mothers. A man named Russell Kellerman, who left Sandra's mother when she was 8, resurfaced in another town, had Craig with a second woman, and left again before Craig turned 10. Died 5 years ago. Left his whole estate to a third family in Ohio neither of them had ever met. Something settled cold and heavy in my chest. The particular weight of understanding a thing that changes nothing about the damage already done. They found each other, I said. Found each other, and found out neither of them got a dime from the father who left them both, Walt said. And somewhere along the way, one of them decided the fastest path back to security was learning exactly how a trust like your grandchildren's gets managed, and marrying into a family generous enough to build one. I sat with that for a long moment, looking at my own hands, the hands that had spent 3 decades finding the small inconsistencies in a ledger that told you everything about a person's character. I thought about Craig at Little League games, ruffling Marcus's hair after a strikeout, telling him it happens to everybody. I thought about how completely I had believed that was real, because most of it probably was. I was starting to understand exactly how this kind of thing survives so long. You don't fake all of it. You only fake the parts that matter. What do you want to do, Bobby? Walt asked. I looked at my old friend, who had gotten in his car at 6 in the morning without being asked twice. I want to know everything, I said. Every transfer, every account, every piece of paper with Sandra Kellerman's name on it. And I want to know it before Craig realizes anyone's looking. Walt nodded and gathered his printouts. At the door, he stopped and turned, his voice dropping into the register we only used with each other maybe twice a decade. How's Renee? She's been carrying this alone since she found that first withdrawal, I said. 3 weeks, Walt, without telling a soul. She's got more of you in her than either of you realize, he said, and then he was gone. I spent that morning doing what I do best, turning a mess into columns. By noon, I'd built a full timeline, every withdrawal, every date, cross-referenced against Craig's known expenses, the lake house closing, a boat he'd bought used that Renee had mentioned once in passing, a phrase I'd filed away without understanding its weight until now. That afternoon, I called my cousin's daughter, Priya's friend from law school, a young estate attorney named Denise Okafor, who agreed to meet me the next morning to talk through my legal options as co-trustee. Denise Okafor was younger than I expected, sharp-eyed, with the particular efficiency of someone who bills by the hour and respects other people's time as much as her own. She listened to the full timeline without interrupting, tapping her pen against a legal pad, and when I finished, she set the pen down. You have standing to freeze this, she said. As co-trustee, you can act unilaterally to protect trust assets if you can show a reasonable basis for suspecting misappropriation. I can file the paperwork today. It takes effect within 48 hours. And after that, if he tries to move money again, the bank flags it and contacts both trustees, she said, which means whatever he and Sandra Kellerman are planning, they'll have to move soon, before the freeze locks them out completely. I felt the same cold clarity I used to feel closing out a set of books that finally balanced. Then we filed today. That evening, I called Renee and asked her to come to the house, alone, and told her enough of the truth to prepare her without breaking her in the process. I did not tell her everything. I told her I'd found irregularities, that I was handling it as co-trustee, that I needed 48 hours before I could tell her the rest, and that whatever happened, I needed her to trust me the way I had always trusted her mother. She sat at my kitchen table, in the chair Ruth used to sit in, and asked the question I'd been dreading. "Dad, is it Craig?" I looked at my daughter, 31 years into a career she'd built from nothing. 22 years since she'd first walked into that beige building, scared and hopeful, and I thought about how much easier it would have been to lie to her for one more night. "I think so," I said. "I'm sorry." Her face didn't crumble the way I expected. It went very still, the particular stillness of someone doing rapid math on 9 years of small moments that suddenly needed recalculating. "The lake house," she said quietly. "He said it was a work retreat property for clients." "I don't think that's true," I said gently. She nodded slowly, and something in her jaw set the way her mother's used to when Ruth had decided a thing and would not be talked out of it. "What do we do?" "We wait 48 hours, I said. "And then we find out exactly what he was planning to do with the rest of that trust." The 48 hours passed the way tense hours always do, too slow, and then suddenly not slow enough. Denise called Wednesday morning to confirm the freeze was in effect. Walt called an hour after that. "He tried to access the account this morning," Walt said. "Got denied. Called the bank twice. Then called a number registered to Sandra Kellerman 4 times in 20 minutes. We have the timestamps." "He's panicking," I said. "He's cornered," Walt said, "which is different and more dangerous. Cornered men do things scared men don't." I asked Renee to bring the kids to my house Wednesday evening, telling her only that we needed to talk as a family, and I asked Denise to be present, and I asked Walt to sit quietly in the next room in case anything more than words became necessary. Craig arrived at 7, having been told only that Renee wanted to discuss something about the kids. He walked in with the same easy smile he'd worn at every family dinner for 9 years, and I watched that smile falter the moment he saw Denise's folder on the table and Walt standing by the window with his arms crossed. "What's going on?" Craig said, and his voice had already changed, already gone careful in the way voices go when a person senses the ground shifting under them. "Sit down, Craig," I said, and my voice stayed level, the same level voice I'd used across 100 meetings with men who thought they'd covered their tracks well enough. "We need to talk about Ferncrest Advisory Solutions." I watched something drain out of his face in real time, the practiced ease replaced by something raw underneath it. "I can explain," he started. "You can," I agreed. "And I'd like you to. Because right now, what I have is $20,000 missing from my grandchildren's education trust, a shell company run by your half-sister, and a lake house you told my daughter was for clients." The room went very quiet. Renee sat with her hands folded so tightly her knuckles had gone pale, watching her husband's face the way you watch something you're not sure you recognize anymore. "Sandra needed help," Craig finally said, and his voice cracked on the name in a way that told me, at least, that part of this was real to him, whatever else wasn't. "She lost everything when her mother got sick. No insurance, no savings. I found out 4 years ago she was my sister, and I thought I could fix something. Our father never gave either of us anything. I thought I could give her what he never did, by stealing from your own children," Renee said, and her voice, when it finally came, was quiet and devastating in a way that filled the whole room. "I was going to pay it back," Craig said. "I swear to you, Renee, I was going to pay every dollar back before the kids ever needed it." "With what money?" I asked. "Your commissions are down 40%. You've got 2 mortgages now." He didn't answer, and the silence answered for him. "There's something else," Denise said carefully, sliding a document across the table. "We found 5 other withdrawals from 3 other accounts tied to Sandra Kellerman going back 6 years. Other families, other trusts. This isn't the first time." Craig's head came up sharply. "What?" "You didn't know," I said, watching his face. And for the first time all evening I believed something he hadn't said out loud. "You thought this was just about you and her. It wasn't." He put his face in his hands, and when he looked up, whatever was left of the easy Little League coach was gone, replaced by someone smaller and more frightened than I'd ever seen him. "I need to see her," he said. "I need to understand what she's actually been doing." "That's between you and the authorities now," Denise said. "Not something to handle privately." Renee stood up. She looked at Craig for a long moment, 9 years compressing into a single expression I couldn't fully read. Grief and fury, and something almost like grief for the version of him she'd believed in. "I need you to leave," she said. "Not forever. I don't know what forever looks like yet. But tonight, I need you to leave. And I need you to understand that whatever happens to Sandra, what you did to my children's future, happened because you chose it. Not because you had no other option. Because you chose the easy fix over telling me the truth." Craig left without another word. Denise stayed another hour going through the paperwork with Renee, laying out the recovery process, the legal filings, what came next. Walt made a pot of coffee nobody really wanted and drank it anyway, because it gave his hands something to do. 3 weeks later, I drove out with Renee and the kids to Ruth's grave, on a rise outside town, where the maples had gone the deep red of late October. Ava and Marcus ran ahead toward the old stone bench, while Renee and I walked slower, matching each other's pace the way you do with someone you've walked beside your whole life. We stood in front of Ruth's headstone, her name, the years, and a line she'd chosen herself from a hymn she loved. Renee looked at it for a long time, her breath making small clouds in the cool air. "I keep thinking she knew," Renee finally said. "3 years ago, before any of us." "She did," I said, and I told her, then, about the folder labeled Watch, about the email to Denise, about the question Craig had asked at a dinner none of us remembered clearly anymore. Renee listened with her jaw working, tears standing in her eyes but not falling. "Why didn't she tell you?" she asked. "Because she got sick before she had the chance to be sure," I said. "And because your mother never said anything about anyone until she'd thought it through completely. She was still thinking it through when she ran out of time." Renee reached out and put her hand flat against the cold stone. "I never blamed you, Dad," she said, "for not seeing it sooner." I looked at her, surprised, because I hadn't realized until she said it how much I'd been carrying exactly that blame myself, quietly, for 3 weeks. "I should have checked those statements more carefully," I said. "I had 30 years of training to catch exactly this, and I still missed it for months." "You caught it in time," Renee said simply. "That's what matters. You caught it before it took everything." My throat closed the way it does when something true lands somewhere you weren't braced for it. I put my hand on the back of her neck, the way I used to when she was small and scared of thunderstorms, a gesture that says more than any sentence I've ever built. "Your mother left something for you," I said, and I took out my phone and showed her the email, the folder, the 4 words that had waited 3 years to be read by the person they were actually meant for. Renee stared at the screen a long time, and when she looked up, her face held something I didn't have one single word for: grief, and love, and the particular ache of being watched over by someone no longer here to finish the sentence. "She was protecting me even then," Renee whispered, "before she even knew for sure." "That was your mother," I said. "She read people the way I read numbers, completely, and usually before anyone else caught up." We stood there while Ava and Marcus chased each other around the stone bench, their laughter carrying across the quiet grass, and somewhere above us, a hawk circled once and drifted west toward the ridge. I am not a perfect father, and I was not a perfect husband either, too often certain that showing up meant providing rather than truly paying attention. If this story has taught me anything, it's that the people who love us are watching more closely than we ever give them credit for, reading the small signals we think we're hiding well. And sometimes the greatest gift we're given is a second chance to finally see what someone tried to show us all along. Don't wait the way I waited. Don't let the quiet distance between you and the people you love grow so wide that it takes a crisis to close it. Check on the people you trust, not because you doubt them, but because love that pays attention is the only kind that actually protects anyone. I believe real protection was never about the money in that account. It was about being the kind of father, the kind of husband, the kind of friend who shows up the moment someone whispers that something is wrong and stays until it's finished. These stories exist because families are complicated and love is imperfect. And sometimes the people who hurt us are the ones we never saw coming. But so, just as often, are the people who save us. If this story stayed with you tonight, friend, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what it meant to you. Share it with someone in your family who needs to hear it. And subscribe so you never miss the next one. Thank you for staying with me until the very end, Claude responded. The people closest to us often notice trouble long before we do sometimes. So early they don't even have the words for it yet. Just a quiet feeling they tuck. The people closest to us often notice trouble long before we do sometimes. So early they don't even have the words for it yet. Just a quiet feeling they tuck away. That's why paying attention now, gently and often, matters more than any account balance ever could. Love isn't proven by providing. It's proven by showing up the moment someone whispers that something's wrong and staying. A small note for you. This story was written and fictionalized by AI, purely to entertain, while hopefully leaving you with a genuine, positive lesson to carry home.